This is another update video because I was brought to my attention again by one of you lovely people that trying to follow my ZDepth tutorial excuse me, was tricky because one of the nodes that I'm telling you to use doesn't show up, and that is actually true. I forgot that the shuffle copy node that I'm referencing in the video for ZDepth, which I made in the previous version of Nuke, no longer exists anymore. It's actually still there. They've just simplified it, which is for the better. So I thought I should do a video to kind of fill you guys in on what to do in lieu of not having a shuffle copy mode anymore. I'm sure some of you have probably figured it out on your own, but either way, I'm going to do this video just to kind of fill in the gap. So in the current version of Nuke, shuffle copy has been eliminated, and the function of shuffle copy has been built into the shuffle node, which has been updated and revamped. And it was long overdue because the shuffle node and shuffle copy node were a little long in the tooth and starting to get fairly old, and they were due for a revamp. So doesn't change what we need to do much, but it changes it enough that I felt it warranted a new video. So I'm going to bring in my ZDepth footage, which I've already rendered. Here it is. Just to confirm, I'm going to go in the depth channel and set the brightness down so I can see in the display, and sure enough, there is my depth information. So I know the data is there. So I'll reset this back, switch this back to RGBA, and now I'll create my shuffle node instead of shuffle copy. So again, shuffle is now a one-stop shop. Okay, so what we're going to have to do is take the ZDepth information from our Z render and plug it into, and essentially combine it with our existing final version of the scene. So if I look at this, I need to make it, as far as Nuke is concerned, I need to trick Nuke into thinking that the depth channel is part of this comp and part of this image. Which right now it isn't. It's a separate file. So that's where the shuffle node comes into play. The shuffle allows you to, again, reshuffle the deck. So it allows you to take, if you think of each read node as a deck of cards, it allows you to take the cards from this deck and the cards from this deck and mix them together to make an ultimate deck that has the deck stacked in our favor ultimately. So to do that, I'm going to first plug in the B pipe that the shuffle has into the existing footage. In all honesty, order doesn't really matter. I can plug them in any order and it'll still work. But I'm going to choose to plug B into my original footage, so just the car comp on its own. And the A, which appears after you've done that. And this is where the difference between shuffle and shuffle copy come into play. In the old version of Nuke, only shuffle copy had two pipes. But with the new version of shuffle, as soon as you plug in one, the second pipe becomes available. It's kind of stuck away to the side here. It's kind of hard to see. It's just a small arrow. I'm going to plug the other arrow, or the other pipe, into my ZDepth footage. Now I'm going to plug that into the viewer, and you can see visually nothing really changes. I'm also going to move this over here so they're kind of close to each other. So again, the shuffle is getting the RGB data from whatever's plugged into B. And right now, it's not getting anything special from A because I haven't changed any of the settings here yet. So what we want to do is take the depth information from the A pipe and output that separately. So that's what we're going to do here. So in the shuffle settings, what we're going to need to do is grab information from pipe A, because that's where the ZDepth is plugged in. So I'm going to switch over the input to A. And you can see it instantly switches over to the render that the ZDepth is attached to. And then in the input layer, I'm going to choose the drop down here and choose depth. That's my depth channel that was rendered. Now it's going to go blank first because we need to also set the output. So for the output in this situation, I'm also going to set depth as my output, and then I have to plug in the pipes between these two here. It's just a node connection. And that should be it. Now, at a glance, you say, well, I don't see the depth. It's back to the original image. That's actually a good thing, because the way it should work is it should pass the RGB through automatically and then add the depth to this image in the drop down here. So if we've done it correctly, we should be able to go to the drop down now and see that the depth actually exists. And again, it shows up red, which is normal. But if I type in 0.0001 here, that's usually dark enough for it to show up, and you can see, yep, it's there. So that is actually exactly what we want. So that's the difference between using the shuffle copy node and the old shuffle copy node and the new shuffle node, which is again a more streamlined experience, and everything is now all kind of brought together. So from here, the rest of the process is pretty much identical to the previous video. Just in case, I'm going to continue on anyway and finish the ZDepth in this file with the new shuffle node. So from here, I'm going to just switch from depth back to RGBA, knowing that the information I need is stored. And now next I'm going to bring in my ZDepth or ZDefocus node. So I'm going to hit Tab to bring up the type in box, type in ZD, and it should pop up. So again, it's ZDefocus that we're looking for. And the whole reason we needed to do this shuffle business is because this only works if the RGB information and the Z information are stored in the same node. And otherwise, we could only add ZDepth to this version of our render, which is obviously crap. This is not designed to be seen. This one is nice and pretty, but it doesn't have the Z information. So that's where the shuffle adds the pretty version along with the ZDepth. So with that done, the ZDefocus node will see both and be able to do its magic. So the ZDefocus settings, going to double click on that. So literally just plug that into the image option of the ZDefocus. You leave the filter empty. That's something separate. You can add lens filters to the ZDefocus to create different shaped lens flares and things like that. That's where it will get plugged in. We're not worrying about that for this example. So now I'm going to plug the ZDefocus into the viewer with the 1 key, and it'll already be blurry. And you can see there's a focal point value here. If I move that around, even with the default settings, it's probably going to give you something. And you can see this actually doesn't look too bad. However, the default settings are probably not quite right. And you can see if I zoom in here especially, there's a weird artifacting happening around the car, which obviously is no good. So we've got to fix that. And the reason that's happening is because the math value in the ZDefocus node is set incorrectly. If you follow my tutorials exactly, then this should be all good. But just in case, the depth channel for us should be set to depth Z. If when you were setting up your shuffle node, if you mapped the output to any other channel besides depth, then you would have to choose it. But again, if you follow my instructions, which essentially in this case are the logical ones, then the default settings should have everything you need for the channels. But the math is set incorrectly. For Arnold, so this is different depending on the software that you're using to generate the renders. Actually, you can say, or see, it says for Maya, it suggests that we use -0, far equals -0. That is if you're using Maya's renderer. We're not. We're using Arnold. And if you go to the Arnold website and do a quick search for Nuke and ZDepth, it tells you there that for Arnold, it should be set to the depth value. So again, different programs will output ZDepth with different math essentially, and you have to tell Nuke which one to use, and ultimately a Google search will usually turn that up. So if you do a search for mental ray ZDepth or what's the other, redshift ZDepth in Nuke, usually the information is out there. So for Arnold specifically, we should be setting it to depth, which I've done. Now you can see it's blending perfectly. There's no weird artifacting around the wing of the car. I'm just getting nice depth of field, and the default setting actually doesn't look that bad. Now if I choose a different focal point, it'll calculate the depth from that point of view, but you can see there's not much changing right now because the settings are still fairly conservative. So one thing that I like to do is use the output value here to switch it over temporarily to focal plane setup. And this gives us a visual diagnostic tool, essentially. And red is the foreground, blue is the background, and it's kind of like the shift of focus, really, so that it starts to get blurry at that halfway point. If we adjust the values here, so focus plane and focal point are adjusted automatically by sliding this around to different points in the scene, and you can see it's choosing depth. So if I want the depth at the tip of the wing, if I put a pixel on the tip of the wing, the depth is going to be calculated from there. If I want it at the cockpit, putting it onto the cockpit, the depth will be calculated from there. The depth of field value essentially allows you to, if you increase that, which I recommend increasing a little bit, it'll give you this new band of color, which is green, and essentially everything in green will be perfectly in focus. Everything in blue behind will be blurry, and depending on the settings you choose here, everything in red could possibly be blurry too. Depth of field has the ability to blur both the foreground and background pixels. So I always use the focal plane setup to get these three bands the way I want them. Maybe I want the focus to be literally just on the driver's helmet if he was there. So if that was the case, I might bring the depth of field down so that the band of green is just where the cockpit is and where the driver will be sitting. So once you're happy with the layout, oh, and by the way, if you adjust this after now, you can see the green is attached to the focal point. So whatever the depth of the focal point is, that's where the green band is calculated from. So it's really easy to adjust that. And then finally, once that's done, I'm going to switch back to result. And then it's just a combination of the maximum and size values that you can use to really crank this up. So if I increase size, it's going to increase the size of the blur area. And eventually, if I get up high enough, you can see even the foreground is blurred. And yeah, here the front of the car is blurred, the back of the car is blurred, but where that green band is perfectly in focus. So you can really focus in on the depth of field on very specific parts of your scene if you so choose. The maximum is kind of like a strength. So if you crank that up, you're going to get really strong depth of field. But again, everything in that green band is safe, as you can see. So that's pretty much how you would work with depth of field in and by plugging into and harnessing the power of a ZDepth map. And yeah, in Nuke, to pull it off, if you've rendered your ZDepth separately, which we have, you're going to need to use the shuffle node to combine them, and then use the ZDefocus node to actually pull out that information and combine and apply it to your actual render. Once you've got that done, by the way, your ZDefocus can just get plugged into your comp. So if I have the color correction, by plugging that in here now, there's my color corrected version of the comp, and here's my version 2, and you can see it's both of them now have the ZDepth applied. If I only wanted to plug the ZDepth into one of those two color corrections, then what I would need to do is make a branch here and have this color correction skip that and get plugged directly back into the original footage, and now it's not getting the ZDepth information, so it's got the original. So it's all about order of operations and where things are plugged in. And that is it for this video.